Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the horizon and watched the alien planet grow larger on the screen. His hands were sweating inside his gloves. This was the most important mission humanity had ever attempted, and everything depended on the next few hours. The Valtorian Empire controlled a third of the known galaxy. They were warriors, conquerors, and the most powerful military force anyone had ever seen. Humanity needed them as allies. Without Valtorian protection, Earth was vulnerable to a dozen hostile species that saw humans as weak newcomers. "Captain, we're receiving docking coordinates," said Lisa Chen from the communications station. She was his science officer and the smartest person on the ship. "They're directing us to the Royal Palace landing platform." "That's a good sign, right?" asked Danny Brooks, the security chief. He was a big man with nervous energy, and his hand kept moving toward his sidearm. "It means the Queen agreed to meet us in person," Lisa said. "Whether that's good or not, we'll find out soon enough." Jake took a deep breath and straightened his uniform. Earth's government had spent 6 months preparing for this meeting. They had studied every piece of information about Valtorian culture. They had practiced the proper greetings and learned the rules of diplomatic engagement. Jake had memorized hundreds of facts about their society, but knowing facts and actually meeting an alien queen were two different things. The Horizon landed smoothly on a platform made of black stone that seemed to absorb light. The palace towered above them, all sharp angles and dark metal. It looked like a fortress, which made sense for a species that valued strength above everything else. "Remember," Jake said to his team as they prepared to disembark, "Valtorians respect direct communication and shows of confidence. Don't apologize unnecessarily, don't show fear, and never back down from a verbal challenge." "Easy for you to say," Danny muttered. "You're not the one worried about whether their warriors will decide to test our combat skills." They walked down the ramp and into the palace. Valtorian guards lined the walls, each one over 7 feet tall and covered in armor-like skin that shimmered with purple and gold colors. They had 4 arms and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Each guard carried weapons that looked capable of cutting through steel. A Valtorian official met them at the entrance. He was slightly smaller than the guards but still towering over the humans. "I am Coordinator Thelmos. Follow me. Queen Serathi will receive you in the Great Hall." They walked through corridors decorated with weapons and battle standards. Every surface seemed designed to intimidate visitors. Jake kept his expression neutral and his pace steady. "Show no fear," he reminded himself. The Great Hall was enormous, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Hundreds of Valtorians filled the space, all of them watching the human delegation with cold curiosity. At the far end of the hall, on a throne made of black metal, sat Queen Serathi. Jake had seen pictures, but they hadn't prepared him for meeting her in person. She was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Her Gatina skin gleamed like polished armor, shifting between deep purple and bright gold as she moved. 4 arms rested on the throne, each one tipped with claws that could probably tear through bone. Her face was angular and sharp, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. Her eyes glowed with an inner light that seemed to look straight through him. She wore minimal clothing, just enough to indicate her rank, because Valtorians believed that showing your natural armor was a sign of confidence. Battle scars marked her torso and arms, each one a testament to challenges she had survived. "Approach, humans," she said in a voice that echoed through the hall. The translator device in Jake's ear rendered it in English, but he could hear the original language underneath, all clicks and deep resonances. Jake led his team forward until they stood at the base of the throne platform. He performed the Valtorian greeting he had practiced, pressing his right fist against his chest and bowing his head slightly. Not too low, because that would suggest submission, but enough to show respect. "Queen Serathi, I am Captain Jake Morrison of Earth. I bring greetings from my people and a proposal for alliance between our species." The Queen leaned forward slightly. "Earth, a small world on the edge of explored space. Your species has been spacefaring for less than a century. Why should the Valtorian Empire ally itself with such inexperienced people?" This was the test. Jake had been warned that Valtorians would immediately challenge any proposal to see how visitors would respond. "Because we offer something you don't have," Jake said, keeping his voice steady. "Fresh perspectives, different ways of thinking, and the determination to survive against impossible odds. Humanity has faced extinction dozens of times in our history, and we're still here. That kind of persistence has value." "Persistence?" The Queen made a sound that might have been a laugh. You speak of surviving. The Valtorian Empire doesn't survive. We conquer. We dominate. What use do we have for species that merely endure? With respect, Your Majesty, conquest requires more than strength. It requires strategy, adaptation, and the ability to solve problems that can't be overcome with force alone. Humanity excels at these things. Bold words from someone who looks as fragile as dried grass, said a large Valtorian standing near the throne. He wore military insignia that marked him as a high-ranking commander. Perhaps we should test whether humans break as easily as they look. Before Jake could respond, the Queen raised one hand. Lord Commander Vexnar, the humans are guests. We do not test guests without cause. She looked back at Jake. However, the commander raises a valid point. Your species does appear physically weak compared to Valtorians. How do you expect to contribute to an alliance when you seem so fragile? Jake felt his diplomatic training warring with frustration. They had been negotiating for less than 5 minutes, and already the Valtorians were dismissing humanity based on appearance. Perhaps we could demonstrate our capabilities in a practical context, Lisa suggested smoothly. We have brought data on human achievements in science, engineering, and tactical operations. Data, the Queen said flatly. Anyone can manipulate data. I prefer direct observation. The negotiations continued for another 2 hours. Every point Jake raised was challenged. Every proposal was met with skepticism. The Valtorians seemed determined to prove that humans had nothing of value to offer. Jake's team worked hard to counter each objection, but they were making no progress. The Queen's advisors whispered among themselves, clearly unimpressed. Vexnar looked openly contemptuous. Finally, the Queen called for a recess. We will break for 1 hour. My court has other matters to attend to. Return here when the sun touches the western tower. Jake and his team were escorted to a waiting room. Danny immediately slumped into a chair. That went poorly. It's not over yet, Lisa said, but she didn't sound convinced. Jake paced the room, his mind racing through every possible approach they could try. Nothing seemed to be working. The Valtorians saw humans as too weak to be useful allies. How could they prove otherwise without insulting their hosts or starting a conflict? Through a window, Jake could see into a courtyard below. Queen Sarathi was there, and he realized she was being challenged. 3 Valtorian warriors stepped forward, apparently questioning her right to rule. It was a formal challenge, he realized, the kind their briefings had mentioned. Anyone could challenge the Queen for her throne if they believed she was weak. Jake watched as Sarathi faced all 3 challengers at once. The fight was brutal and quick. She moved with incredible speed and precision, using all 4 arms to block, strike, and grab. Within minutes, all 3 challengers were on the ground, defeated but alive. The Queen had proven her right to rule. She stood over them, covered in ceremonial paint that had marked the combat as official, and Jake found himself genuinely impressed. She hadn't just won through superior strength. She had used strategy, reading her opponents and exploiting their mistakes. She had led them into fighting each other as much as fighting her. That's actually incredible, he muttered to himself, watching her leave the courtyard. You know, for a terrifying alien warlord, she'd actually make a cute wife. At least she can handle herself in a fight. He meant it as a private observation, a way to process the stress of the situation through humor. He thought he was alone by the window. His translator turned off. He was wrong on both counts. The entire room went silent. Jake turned slowly and saw Lisa staring at him in horror. The translator unit on his belt was glowing, indicating it was active. And through the open window, amplified by the room's acoustics, his words had carried into the courtyard below. Queen Sarathi stood in the doorway, her luminescent eyes locked onto him. The ceremonial paint was still fresh on her skin. Behind her, dozens of Valtorian nobles had gathered, all of them having heard his comment. The Queen's expression was unreadable. Then slowly she smiled. Her sharp teeth gleamed in the light. You have issued a marriage proposal, she said, her voice carrying absolute certainty. I accept. She clapped her 4 hands together twice, the sound echoing like gunshots. A Valtorian priest appeared almost immediately, as if he had been waiting nearby. He carried ceremonial items that Jake didn't recognize. Wait, Jake said, his voice cracking slightly. That wasn't a proposal. That was just a comment, a joke, a private observation. You acknowledged my worthiness as a mate in the presence of witnesses, the Queen said. By Valtorian law, this constitutes a formal proposal. To refuse now would be an insult to my honor and to the honor of my empire. Coordinator Thelma stepped forward, looking between Jake and the Queen. "The human may not understand our customs, Your Majesty. Perhaps we should explain." "The law is clear." Vexnar interrupted, and Jake could hear the satisfaction in his voice. He made a proposal. The Queen accepted. To withdraw now would be an insult demanding satisfaction through combat. Jake's mind raced. If he refused, he would insult the Queen and probably start a war. Earth needed this alliance. Billions of people were counting on him. But if he accepted, he would be marrying an alien queen from a species he had met less than 3 hours ago. Lisa grabbed his arm. "Captain, we need to contact Earth Command. This is way beyond our authority to decide." "There's no time," Danny said quietly. "Look at them. They expect an answer now." Jake looked at Queen Sarathi. She watched him with those glowing eyes, waiting. He realized that this was another test, perhaps the most important one. How would he respond when faced with an impossible situation? He thought about his training, about diplomatic protocols, about consequences. Then he thought about what she had said. By Valtorian law, refusing would be an insult, but accepting might save the alliance. Jake took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. Jake straightened his shoulders and looked directly at Queen Sarathi. "I accept the terms of the proposal," he said clearly. "If this is what it takes to forge an alliance between our peoples, then I will honor Valtorian customs." The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Clearly, many had expected the human to refuse and face the consequences. Vexnar's expression darkened with what looked like disappointment. The Queen's smile widened slightly. "Then we shall proceed with the ceremony immediately. Valtorian tradition demands that marriage bonds be sealed swiftly, before either party can reconsider." Lisa pulled Jake aside as the priest began preparing the ceremonial space. "Captain, this is insane. You can't marry an alien queen. Earth Command will lose their minds." "Earth Command will have to deal with it," Jake said quietly. "If I refuse, we lose the alliance and probably start a war. At least this way humanity has a chance. But marriage? There has to be another option." Danny joined them, his face grim. "I've been researching Valtorian marriage law on my datapad. Captain, this is binding. Like permanently binding. Their divorce laws are almost non-existent. If you do this, you're locked in." "I understand the stakes," Jake said, though his stomach was churning. "But I don't see another path forward. Send a message to Earth. Tell them what happened and that I'm proceeding under my authority as mission commander." Lisa looked like she wanted to argue more, but she nodded and pulled out her communication device. Danny stayed close to Jake, clearly worried about security. The priest approached Jake with what appeared to be ceremonial robes. "You must wear these for the ceremony," he said in accented but clear English. "They mark you as one entering a royal bond." The robes were surprisingly light, made from a material that shimmered like oil on water. They fit over his uniform and actually looked impressive in an alien sort of way. Jake caught sight of his reflection in a polished wall panel and barely recognized himself. Queen Sarathi had changed as well. She now wore elaborate ceremonial armor that covered more of her body than before, each piece engraved with symbols Jake couldn't read. She looked even more imposing than before, like a warrior goddess from ancient myths. The ceremony began with the priest chanting in the Valtorian language. Jake's translator struggled to keep up, but he caught phrases about strength, unity, and the joining of bloodlines. The gathered nobles formed a circle around them, creating an arena-like space. "The first trial," the priest announced, "is the test of strength. The bonding partners must prove they can stand together against opposition." Before Jake could ask what that meant, 2 Valtorian warriors stepped into the circle. They were huge even by Valtorian standards, and carried staffs that crackled with energy. "You must last 3 minutes against the challengers," the priest explained. "Your bond with the Queen allows you to fight as one unit. Show us that you can defend each other." Jake looked at Sarathi, panic rising in his chest. "I should probably mention that humans aren't as strong as Valtorians." "Not even close." The Queen's eyes glimmered with what might have been amusement. "Then you will need to be clever instead of strong. Stay close to me and follow my lead." The challengers attacked immediately. Jake barely had time to process what was happening before Sarathi was moving. All 4 arms engaged in a blur of defensive strikes. She positioned herself between Jake and the nearest warrior, blocking attacks that would have killed him instantly. But she couldn't defend both of them and attack at the same time. The second warrior came around her side, staff aimed at Jake. Jake did the only thing he could think of. He dropped low and swept his leg out, trying to trip the warrior. It was like trying to trip a tree. The Valtorian didn't even stumble, but the attack had surprised him, giving Sarathi a split second to strike. One of her hands lashed out and caught the warrior's staff, redirecting his momentum. The two warriors collided with each other, tangled for just a moment. "Not bad," Sarathi said, breathing hard. Again. The 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. Jake quickly learned that he couldn't hurt the warriors, but he could distract them. He darted around their feet, grabbed at their staffs, threw ceremonial objects from the edges of the circle. Anything to give Sarathi openings to counterattack. It wasn't elegant combat. Jake got hit twice, blows that sent him rolling across the floor, probably cracking ribs. But he got back up each time, driven by sheer determination not to fail in front of everyone. When the priest finally called time, both warriors stepped back and bowed. They looked at Jake with something that might have been respect. He had survived, which apparently was the point. "The second trial," the priest continued, "is the bonding of minds. You must open yourselves to each other completely." The priest produced a bowl containing a glowing liquid. "Each of you must drink. Then you will touch the other's primary heart. This creates a temporary mental link so that you may know the truth of each other's intentions." Jake drank the liquid. It tasted like metal and lightning. His vision swam for a moment, and then the priest was guiding his hand toward Sarathi's upper chest, where her primary heart beat beneath her armor. The moment his hand made contact, Jake's mind exploded with sensation. He saw flashes of Sarathi's memories. Her childhood spent training for combat, the day she challenged her father for the throne because he had become a tyrant who sacrificed his people for personal glory, the weight of ruling an empire, making decisions that affected trillions of lives, the loneliness of being a queen who could trust no one completely. He felt her emotions too. Curiosity about these strange humans, amusement at his clumsy proposal, but also something deeper, a genuine interest in someone who had looked at her and seen not just a terrifying ruler, but someone who could be attractive. Someone who, when he thought no one was listening, had spoken with honesty, rather than fear or ambition. And she was seeing into his mind, too. He felt her presence there, examining his memories. His childhood on Earth, growing up in a world recovering from environmental collapse. His decision to join the space program to help humanity reach for the stars. His fear of failing this mission. His dedication to protecting his crew and his species. The connection lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When it broke, Jake staggered backward, gasping. Sarathi looked equally affected, her eyes wide with surprise. "You truly believed it was a joke?" she said quietly, speaking so only he could hear. "You meant no insult." "I know," Jake said, still reeling from the mental connection. "And you knew that all along. You can sense emotional intent. You knew I was being honest about finding you impressive, even if I phrased it stupidly." She smiled again, that sharp-toothed smile that no longer seemed quite so threatening. "Perhaps I saw an opportunity, a human captain, desperate for an alliance, who looked at me and saw someone interesting. That is rare in my world." Before Jake could respond, the priest was calling for the final part of the ceremony, the scarring of unity. Each partner must bear a mark that shows they belong to the other. A Valtorian came forward with what looked like a branding tool. Jake's eyes widened. "It's not as bad as it looks," Sarathi assured him. "The mark will heal quickly. It's symbolic more than painful." That turned out to be a lie. The marking was extremely painful. Jake gritted his teeth as the hot metal pressed against his forearm, creating a design that would scar into his skin. He refused to cry out, refused to show weakness in front of the assembled nobles. When it was done, he had a permanent mark on his arm. A Valtorian symbol that, according to the priest, meant united in strength. Sarathi received her mark as well, placed on one of her forearms. She didn't even flinch. "The ceremony is complete," the priest announced. "Queen Sarathi and Captain Jake Morrison are now bound under Valtorian law. They are one unit, one force, one power. All who witness this are bound to recognize and honor this union." The assembled nobles made a ceremonial sound, something between a chant and a war cry. It was official. Jake was married to an alien queen. Lisa pushed through the crowd as soon as the ceremony ended. Earth Command responded. They're furious, confused, and demanding explanations. But they're also calculating the political implications. "You've just become the most important human diplomat in the galaxy." "That's wonderful," Jake said weakly. "Can someone get me a medical kit? I think those warriors broke something during the first trial." Danny appeared with a first aid kit and started scanning Jake with medical equipment. 3 cracked ribs, extensive bruising, and a concussion. You should be in a hospital bed. I'll rest later, Jake said. Right now I need to figure out what happens next. Sarathi approached, having shed her ceremonial armor. What happens next is that you move into the royal quarters. Valtorian marriages aren't symbolic. You're my consort now, which means you share my living space, my responsibilities, and my enemies. Enemies? Did you think everyone here was happy about this? Sarathi gestured to the nobles who were dispersing. Many see you as a weakness. A human consort is unprecedented. Some of my advisors will try to use this against me. Others will try to eliminate you to weaken my position. Jake felt a headache building that had nothing to do with his concussion. So I need to worry about assassination attempts now. Welcome to royal life, Sarathi said dryly. But don't worry. I've survived hundreds of challenges to my rule. We'll face these together. Over the next few hours, Jake's life transformed completely. His crew was given quarters in the palace, but he was moved to the royal wing. The rooms were enormous, decorated with weapons and battle trophies. Everything was sized for Valtorians, making Jake feel small and out of place. Lisa came to brief him on the situation back on Earth. The news is spreading fast. You're all over the media. Some people are calling you a hero who secured an impossible alliance. Others are saying you've been trapped or compromised. The government is trying to control the narrative, but it's chaos. Tell them I did what was necessary, Jake said, and that I need time to make this work. That night, Jake sat in the royal quarters trying to process everything. He had woken up that morning as a regular captain on a diplomatic mission. Now he was married to an alien queen, marked with a permanent scar and apparently a target for assassination. Sarathi found him sitting by a window, looking out at the alien city below. Having regrets? She asked. I'm having a lot of emotions, Jake admitted. Regret might be one of them. Terror is definitely another. But I stand by my decision. If this is what it takes to protect Earth, then I'll make it work. She sat down beside him, which required her to fold her long legs at an awkward angle to fit in the human-sized chair he had requested. You're stronger than you look, Jake Morrison. Most beings would have refused, consequences be damned. You chose duty over pride. In my species, we call that being responsible, or possibly being an idiot. I haven't decided which. Sarathi made that sound that might have been laughter. In my species, we call it being worthy. You may have stumbled into this marriage accidentally, but you're facing it honorably. That matters. They sat in silence for a while, 2 beings from different worlds trying to figure out how to make an impossible situation work. Outside, the alien city glowed with lights. Above, unfamiliar stars wheeled through the sky. Jake thought about Earth, billions of miles away. He thought about his crew now living in a palace. He thought about the mark on his arm that bound him to this alien queen. And he thought that maybe, just maybe, he could make this work. 3 weeks passed since the wedding ceremony, and Jake was learning that being an alien queen's consort was more complicated than he had imagined. The Valtorian court operated on rules he barely understood. Every gesture meant something. Every word carried weight, and everyone was watching him constantly, looking for signs of weakness. He spent his mornings training with Sarathi's warriors, trying to improve his combat skills. The sessions were brutal. Valtorians didn't believe in going easy on anyone, consort or not. Jake collected new bruises daily and learned to fight through pain that would have sent him to a hospital back on Earth. His afternoons were filled with diplomatic meetings and lessons on Valtorian culture. Lisa had essentially become his cultural advisor, helping him understand the complex social hierarchies and political games being played around him. The problem, Lisa explained during one of their planning sessions, is that half the court sees you as a joke and the other half sees you as a threat. Neither perspective helps us. What about the ones who see me as both? Jake asked dryly. Those are the dangerous ones, Danny added. He had been tracking potential security threats since day one. I've identified at least 7 nobles who have the means and motivation to move against you. Vexnar tops the list. The Lord Commander had made no secret of his disdain for Jake. He spoke openly about how the Queen had weakened herself by binding to a human. In any other situation, such talk would have resulted in a challenge to combat. But Vexnar was too smart for that. He stayed just within the bounds of acceptable criticism. Jake knew he needed to prove human worth in a way the Valtorians would respect. The problem was that humans couldn't match Valtorian physical strength. Their entire culture revolved around combat prowess and displays of power. How could Jake demonstrate value when he was fundamentally weaker than everyone around him? The opportunity came unexpectedly during a military briefing. Jake had started attending these meetings as part of his role as consort. He usually stayed quiet, listening and learning. The Kreth raiders have attacked another mining colony on the border, reported Commander Thargan, a senior military officer. 17 workers killed, significant equipment destroyed. They escaped before our response fleet arrived. This is the 4th attack this month, Sarathi said, her 4 hands folded in frustration. Why can't we catch them? They use guerrilla tactics, Thargan explained. They strike fast and disappear into the asteroid fields before we can respond. Our ships are too large to navigate those spaces effectively. Send fighters, suggested Vexnar. Small, fast vessels that can pursue them. We've tried that. The Kreth know those asteroid fields perfectly. They lead our fighters into traps and ambushes. We've lost 2 squadrons that way. Jake listened carefully, his mind working through the problem. The Valtorian approach was straightforward as always. They wanted to meet the enemy with superior force and crush them. But the Kreth weren't fighting that kind of battle. If I may make a suggestion, Jake said carefully. Everyone turned to look at him. He was used to that reaction now. This sounds like a problem that might benefit from a different approach. And what approach would that be? Vexnar asked with barely concealed contempt. Perhaps you can negotiate with the raiders? Offer them a marriage proposal? Several nobles made sounds that might have been Valtorian laughter. Jake kept his expression neutral. I was thinking more about patience and persistence. The Kreth are using the asteroid field as their advantage. What if we took that advantage away? Explain, Sarathi said, leaning forward with interest. Back on Earth, humans are persistence hunters. We're not the fastest or strongest predators, but we can outlast almost anything. We track prey for days if necessary, never letting them rest or recover. The Kreth are treating this like a series of quick battles. What if we made it a long campaign instead? Thargan looked skeptical. You're suggesting we stake out the asteroid field and wait for them? More than that. I'm suggesting we send a team in to hunt them down. Not with overwhelming force, but with patience and strategy. Track them, harass them, wear them down until they have no choice but to surrender or make a mistake. That could take weeks, Vexnar scoffed. Valtorian warriors don't hide in asteroids for weeks. No, but human soldiers do, Jake said. Let me take a team. We'll find the Kreth base and eliminate it. If we fail, you lose nothing but a few humans. If we succeed, you learn a new tactical approach. The room erupted in argument. Some thought it was foolish to send humans on a military mission. Others were curious to see what Jake had in mind. Vexnar clearly hoped Jake would fail and embarrass himself. Sarathi silenced them all with a gesture. Very well. Captain Morrison, you may attempt this mission. Commander Thargan will accompany you to observe and report back. Take whichever humans you need from your crew. Thank you, Your Majesty, Jake said formally. Then, dropping into more casual speech, try not to miss me too much while I'm gone. That got actual laughter from some of the nobles. Sarathi's eyes glimmered with amusement. Just make sure you come back, consort. Widowhood doesn't suit me. Jake assembled his team quickly. Danny volunteered immediately, along with 6 Marines from the Horizon who had military training. Lisa insisted on coming to handle technical aspects and communication. Thargan joined them with obvious reluctance, clearly viewing this as a waste of his time. They took a small ship into the asteroid field where the Kreth had last been spotted. The field was a massive expanse of tumbling rocks and debris, remnants of a planet that had been destroyed millions of years ago. Navigation was treacherous and sensors were nearly useless with all the interference. This is impossible, Thargan declared after their first day of searching. We could spend months out here and never find them. Not if we're patient and observant, Jake said. He had the team spread out looking for any signs of passage. Disturbed asteroid trajectories, chemical traces, heat signatures. Anything that suggested ships had been through an area recently. It took 3 days to find the first real clue. A small deposit of refined metals on an asteroid surface, exactly the kind the Kreth had stolen from the mining colonies. They passed through here, Lisa confirmed, and based on the distribution pattern, they were moving that direction. They followed the trail deeper into the asteroid field. Thargan grew increasingly frustrated with the slow pace. This isn't warfare. This is tedious searching. This is exactly warfare, Jake countered. Just not the kind you're used to. Valtorians fight with overwhelming force in decisive battles. Humans fight with patience and persistence. Both approaches work, just in different situations. On the 5th day, they found the Kreth base. It was hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid, nearly invisible to scanners. A small fleet of raider ships was docked there, being repaired and resupplied. We should report back and bring the fleet, Thargan said. Now that we know where they are, we can destroy them. They'll see the fleet coming and escape, Jake said. They've done it before. No, we need to take away their ability to run first. Over the next 2 days, Jake's team conducted what he called harassment operations. They didn't attack the base directly. Instead, they sabotaged ships when raiders left the asteroid. They destroyed supply caches. They created diversions that pulled defenders away from key positions. The Kreth knew they were being hunted but couldn't pin down their attackers. The humans would strike and disappear, strike and disappear. They never stayed in one place long enough to be caught. They never engaged in direct combat when they could avoid it. Thargan watched all of this with growing fascination. This is not honorable combat, he observed. No, Jake agreed. But it's effective combat. Honor is great when both sides agree to fight fairly. The Kreth aren't interested in fair fights, so neither are we. On the 8th day, the Kreth made their mistake. Frustrated and exhausted from constant harassment, they sent their entire defensive force out to hunt the humans. It was exactly what Jake had been waiting for. His team infiltrated the base while the defenders were scattered across the asteroid field. They planted explosives on the remaining ships and destroyed the base's power generation systems. When the Kreth returned, they found their base crippled and their escape routes cut off. Jake opened a communication channel. This is Captain Jake Morrison representing the Valtorian Empire. Your base is destroyed. Your ships are disabled. You have 2 choices. Surrender peacefully, or we continue these operations until you're all dead. It might take weeks, but we have time. There was a long silence. Then the Kreth commander responded. We surrender. Thargan looked stunned. They're giving up? They still outnumber us 3-1. Numbers don't matter if you can't win, Jake said. We broke their ability to fight and their will to continue. That's victory. When they returned to the Valtorian homeworld with captured Kreth raiders in tow, the court's reception was very different from what Jake had experienced before. Thargan gave his report, describing the human tactics in detail. The way they had tracked an enemy through impossible terrain, the patience they had shown, the psychological warfare that had broken the Kreth's will to fight. The crowd's reaction changed. Initial mockery gave way to confusion, and then to something like respect. They were watching a warrior who wouldn't quit, couldn't be broken. It wasn't elegant or traditional, but it was undeniably brave. Jake's armor was in pieces. Blood ran from a dozen wounds. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, but he was still standing. Why won't you die? Vexenar demanded. Because I'm human, Jake gasped. And humans don't give up, ever. He pulled the last trick his team had built into his armor, a high-voltage discharge system, powered by kinetic energy from all the hits he had taken. It was a one-shot weapon, and he had been saving it for the right moment. When Vexenar charged in for what should have been the killing blow, Jake triggered the discharge. Electricity arced through both of them. Vexenar, being larger and wetter from exertion, took the worst of it. He stumbled, temporarily stunned. Jake didn't have the strength to do real damage, but he managed to get behind Vexenar and apply a chokehold, using his entire body weight. It was a human wrestling technique, one that didn't require strength if applied correctly. Vexenar struggled, but he was exhausted and disoriented. Jake held on with everything he had. 3 minutes of sustained pressure, his muscles screaming, his consciousness fading. Finally, Vexenar went limp. The referee called the match. Jake had won by technical knockout. Jake released the hold and collapsed onto the sand, unable to move. Medical teams rushed into the circle. The last thing he heard before losing consciousness was the roar of the crowd. Jake woke up 3 days later in the Royal Medical Wing. Every part of his body hurt. Medical equipment surrounded his bed, monitors beeping steadily. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was or what had happened. Then memory flooded back. The challenge. The fight. Vexenar. He had won. Somehow, impossibly, he had won. You're awake, said a familiar voice. Sarathi stood beside his bed, looking more worried than he had ever seen her. I was beginning to think you'd sleep for a week. How long was I out? Jake's voice came out as a croak. 3 days. Your injuries were extensive. Broken ribs, fractured skull, internal bleeding, severe concussion. The doctor said you should be dead. She reached out and gently touched his hand. You could have been killed. Why did you do it? Because I wasn't going to let Vexnar cheat his way to your throne, Jake said simply. And because you're my wife. Strange as that sounds, it's true. I wasn't going to let you die if I could prevent it. Sarathi's eyes gleamed with emotion. In my language, we have a word for warriors who fight impossible battles knowing they'll likely die. It translates roughly to honor-bound fool. You fit that description perfectly. I'll take that as a compliment. It is one. The highest compliment my people have. Lisa appeared in the doorway, looking relieved. Captain, you scared us all. The whole crew has been waiting for you to wake up. What happened after the fight? Did Kevin's recordings work? Better than we hoped, Lisa said with satisfaction. The medical examination of Vexnar after the fight revealed traces of an illegal enhancement drug. He was investigated and tried to blame his loss on you somehow, but then Kevin's evidence showed the poisoning conspiracy. 3 servants testified once they realized they'd be executed alongside Vexnar if they stayed silent. So he's been dealt with, exiled to a prison colony at the edge of Valtorian space. He'll spend the rest of his life there. The High Council issued formal apologies to you and the Queen. Danny came in next, grinning. You've become famous, Captain. The video of your fight has spread across the entire galaxy. Every species is talking about the human who fought a Valtorian warlord and won through sheer refusal to quit. I mostly just got beaten up and tried not to die. That's not how people see it. They see a warrior from a species everyone dismissed as weak, who stood up to one of the most dangerous fighters in the galaxy, and won. Humanity's reputation has changed overnight. Over the following weeks, as Jake recovered, the political situation transformed. The alliance between Earth and the Valtorian Empire was formalized with full military and trade agreements. Other species that had ignored humanity now sent diplomatic envoys. Earth gained access to advanced technology and protection from hostile forces. Jake found himself at the center of it all. He was promoted to Admiral by Earth Command, though he was still technically assigned to the Valtorian court. He became humanity's most important diplomat without really trying. The Valtorian High Council, after intense debates, officially recognized Jake's position as royal consort with full rights and responsibilities. Some nobles still grumbled about it, but none openly challenged the decision. Jake had proven himself too thoroughly. Earth's government struggled to process what had happened. They sent delegations to meet with Jake and Sarathi, trying to understand this new political reality. Jake's mother, Claire Morrison, made the long journey from Earth to meet her alien daughter-in-law. The meeting was awkward at first. Claire was a practical woman, a teacher who had raised Jake to be responsible and thoughtful. She had not prepared for him to marry a 7-foot-tall alien queen with 4 arms. So, Claire said, sitting in the royal quarters and trying not to stare, you're the person my son accidentally proposed to. I am, Sarathi confirmed. I hope that doesn't cause problems between us. Honestly, I'm still processing it. When Jake joined the space program, I knew he'd have adventures. I didn't imagine this. Claire looked at her son, who was still recovering but getting stronger each day. But he seems happy. Different, but happy. Your son is remarkable, Sarathi said seriously. He faced an impossible situation and made it work through courage and persistence. You raised him well. Claire smiled at that. I tried. Though I can't claim credit for the stubborn streak. That's all, Jake. They talked for hours. 2 mothers from different species finding common ground in their concern for Jake. By the end, Claire had cautiously approved of the match, even if she still thought the whole situation was bizarre. The alliance celebration was held 2 months after the fight. Representatives from dozens of species attended, including most of the major galactic powers. The event was both political and symbolic, marking humanity's official entrance into galactic politics. Jake stood beside Sarathi as they greeted ambassadors and dignitaries. He wore formal attire that blended human and Valtorian styles, a symbol of the union between their peoples. The scar from his wedding ceremony was visible on his forearm, a permanent reminder of how this had all started. Quite a turnout, Jake murmured to Sarathi during a brief quiet moment. Everyone wants to see the human who changed the galaxy, she replied. You've become a symbol, the weak species that proved it wasn't weak at all. I still don't feel particularly strong. Strength isn't just about physical power. You've taught the galaxy that your species endures, adapts, and overcomes obstacles through determination rather than force. That's a different kind of strength, but no less valuable. During the ceremony, Jake gave a speech that was broadcast across known space. He kept it simple and direct. 3 months ago, I came to this world hoping to secure an alliance for my species. I made a stupid joke that got me accidentally married to a queen. It wasn't what I planned. It wasn't what anyone planned. But sometimes the best outcomes come from unexpected beginnings. The crowd listened attentively. Jake had their respect now, earned through combat and survival. Humanity is new to the galactic community. We're not the strongest species or the most advanced, but we have something to offer. We never give up. We face impossible situations and find ways to survive. We adapt, we persist, and we keep moving forward no matter what obstacles appear. He looked at Sarathi, who nodded encouragingly. The alliance between Earth and the Valtorian Empire represents more than just a political agreement. It represents the idea that different species, with different strengths and different ways of thinking, can work together and become stronger than either would be alone. That's the future I hope we're building here. Not one where the strong dominate the weak, but one where everyone contributes their unique abilities. The speech was well received. Afterward, dozens of species approached Jake to discuss potential partnerships with humanity. Earth's diplomatic corps, which had arrived for the celebration, scrambled to handle all the new opportunities. Later that evening, Jake found a quiet moment alone with Sarathi on a balcony overlooking the city. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what happens next. Earth Command wants me back. They want to leverage my position for political advantage. But I'm also your consort, which means I have responsibilities here." "What do you want?" Sarathi asked, honestly. "I want both. I want to serve my species and help them navigate this new galactic community. But I also want to be here with you. Is there a way to do that?" They worked out a compromise over the following weeks. Jake would split his time between Earth and the Valtorian homeworld. He would serve as humanity's primary liaison to the Valtorian Empire, while also fulfilling his duties as royal consort. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was workable. Lisa was promoted to full ambassador, taking over much of the day-to-day diplomatic work. Danny became head of a joint human-Valtorian security force, training both species in combined tactical operations. Kevin joined Valtorian intelligence, where his skills were highly valued. The Horizon was redesignated as a joint exploration vessel. Sarathi decided she wanted to see more of the galaxy, and Jake was happy to show it to her. They assembled a combined crew of humans and Valtorians, with Thargan as first officer. Before they departed on their first joint mission, Jake spent time on Earth showing Sarathi his homeworld. She was fascinated by Earth's diversity, both environmental and cultural. The Valtorians had evolved on a single unified world. Earth's history of competing nations and cultures that eventually united intrigued her. "Your species is so fractured," she observed as they visited different regions. "How did you ever manage to work together?" "We didn't for a long time," Jake admitted. "We fought wars, built walls, refused to cooperate. But eventually we realized we had to work together or die separately. It took a near-extinction event to really unite us, but we got there." That persistence again. Even your species' history is one of refusing to give up. They visited Jake's childhood home, a modest house in a rebuilt city. His mother had prepared a meal, attempting to cook food that would be safe for Valtorian biology. It was a disaster, but Sarathi appreciated the effort. "Your world is beautiful," Sarathi said as they stood in Jake's old backyard looking at the stars. "Chaotic and strange, but beautiful." "It's home," Jake said. "And now you're part of it, just like I'm part of your world." The final departure ceremony for the Horizon was attended by officials from both species. Jake's crew, now a mix of humans and Valtorians, prepared the ship for launch. They would be exploring the galactic frontier, seeking new worlds and making first contact with unknown species. As they prepared to depart, Jake reflected on everything that had happened. 3 months ago, he had been a simple captain on a diplomatic mission. Now he was married to an alien queen, serving as a bridge between two very different species and about to explore unknown space. "Any regrets?" Sarathi asked as they stood on the bridge together. "About the accidental proposal?" "Sometimes. About everything that came after? Not really. Jake looked at his wedding band, a fusion of human gold and Valtorian crystal. I guess sometimes the most important relationships start with the worst pickup lines. Sarathi laughed, that clicking sound he had come to recognize as genuine amusement. I should tell you something. I knew your comment was a joke from the beginning. Jake turned to stare at her. What? Valtorians can sense emotional intent. I knew you were making an observation, not a serious proposal. But I also sensed something genuine beneath the humor. You really were impressed by me and you weren't afraid. That's rare. So you trapped me into marriage knowingly? I saw an opportunity and took it. You were clever, determined, and honest. Qualities I value. I thought you might make a good partner if given the chance. Was I wrong? Jake thought about everything they had been through. The challenges, the battles, the growing understanding between them. No, he admitted. You weren't wrong. Though a little warning would have been nice. Where's the fun in that? The Horizon launched smoothly, carrying its mixed crew into unknown space. Jake stood beside Sarathi, watching Earth and the Valtorian homeworld both shrink behind them. Two worlds, two species bound together by an accidental marriage and the determination to make it work. You know what the funny thing is? Jake said as they jumped to faster-than-light travel. Humanity spent decades trying to figure out how to establish ourselves in galactic politics. We tried every strategy, every diplomatic approach, and in the end what worked was me making a stupid joke about an alien queen being cute. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones you never plan for, Sarathi said. We make our own fate even when we stumble into it accidentally. They traveled into the unknown together, partners in every sense. The human who never gave up and the alien queen who took a chance on him. Behind them, two civilizations were building a future based on mutual respect and understanding. Ahead, new challenges and adventures waited. Jake looked at the stars spreading out before them and smiled. His life had taken an impossible turn, but he wouldn't change it. He had set out to save his species and ended up finding something he hadn't known he was looking for. A partnership. An alliance. And against all odds, something that looked very much like love. The Horizon jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying them toward whatever came next. Human and Valtorian, exploring the galaxy together. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Not just for Jake and Sarathi, but for everyone who believed that different species could work together and build something better than either could alone. And it had all started with one accidental proposal, and the determination to see it through no matter how impossible it seemed. The council room was massive, bigger than any building Jake Morrison had ever seen back on Earth. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds formed near the top, and the walls glowed with a soft blue light that came from crystals the size of trucks. Hundreds of aliens filled the space, each one stranger than the last. The Valkyrians sat in the front rows like they owned the place. They looked like giant insects, standing 10 feet tall with bodies covered in hard crystal shells that reflected the light in rainbow colors. Their multiple eyes moved independently, watching everything at once. When they talked, their mouths clicked and clacked in a way that made Jake's skin crawl. Next to them were the Threxians, creatures with 4 arms and skin that changed colors based on their mood. Right now, most of them showed deep purple, which Jake had learned meant they were feeling superior and pleased with themselves. Their ambassador, Krelnax, gestured with all 4 arms as he talked, making sure everyone in the room watched him. Floating above the crowd were the Zephlon spheres, transparent balls filled with glowing gas where telepathic beings lived. They could push their thoughts directly into your head if they wanted to, though they usually only bothered with species they considered important. Jake had felt their mental touch once, and it had felt like ice water being poured through his brain. All around the room, dozens of other alien species filled the seats. Some breathed different air and sat in special containers. Others were so large they took up 3 seats each. A few were so small that Jake could barely see them even with the magnification screens. Every single one of them had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, building empires and fighting wars while humans were still learning to make fire. And in the very back corner, almost hidden behind a support column, sat the human delegation. 3 people in a room of thousands. Jake sat with his arms crossed, his face showing nothing. Next to him, Lisa Chen typed notes on her datapad, her fingers moving steadily across the screen. On his other side, Ben Carter fought to keep his eyes open. They had been sitting here for 17 hours straight, listening to debates about trade routes and mining rights and territorial disputes. The Valkyrian High Chancellor, Sixthor, raised one of his blade-like arms for silence. The room quieted immediately. His voice came out in clicks and whistles, but the translator in Jake's ear turned it into words he could understand. "We now address the matter of the human petition," Zixthor said. His mandibles moved in what the humans had learned was the Valkyrian version of a smile. It was not a friendly expression. The species that only learned to travel faster than light 30 years ago wishes to sit on our Security Council. Laughter filled the room. It came in different forms depending on the species. Some clicked. Some whistled. Some made sounds that had no human equivalent, but the meaning was the same. They thought the idea was ridiculous. Kralnak stood up, his forearms spread wide. "Perhaps in another 1,000 years we might consider such a request. If they managed to survive that long, of course." More laughter echoed through the chamber. Jake did not move. His face stayed calm and empty. Lisa kept typing. Ben yawned and covered it poorly with his hand. The council moved on to other business. The Valkyrians wanted to claim 3 new sectors of space for mining and resource collection. 2 of those sectors were right next to human colonies, but nobody seemed to care about that detail. The Threxians seconded the motion immediately. Jake noticed how Kralnax and Zixthor exchanged looks. They had clearly made a deal before the meeting started. "All in favor?" Zixthor called out. Arms and tentacles and appendages of every description rose into the air. The vote was unanimous. Well, almost unanimous. Jake raised his hand in objection, but nobody looked at him. "The human objection is noted for the record," Zixthor said without even glancing in their direction. "Motion passes." Just like that, millions of humans living in those sectors now had to deal with Valkyrian control. Their homes, their farms, their lives. All decided in 5 minutes by aliens who thought of them as barely more than clever animals. As the session finally ended, several delegates walked past the human section. A Threxian stopped and looked down at them with all 4 eyes. "Don't feel bad," he said in a voice that dripped with false kindness. "Every species must start at the bottom. You'll understand how things work eventually." Jake smiled politely. "I'm sure we will." A Zephlon sphere floated nearby, and suddenly Jake felt the cold touch of thoughts that were not his own entering his mind. "Perhaps in time you will prove yourselves worthy of notice. Until then, observe and learn from your betters." "We're learning a lot," Jake replied out loud. The sphere pulsed once and drifted away. The 3 humans gathered their materials and walked toward the exit. Not the main exit that the other delegates used with its grand archway and ceremonial guards. They headed for the side door marked for observer species and non-voting members. The door that led to the back hallways where the maintenance crews worked. As they walked down the narrow corridor, Ben finally spoke. "How much longer do we have to put up with this garbage?" "As long as it takes," Jake said. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. Something hard. Lisa looked up from her pad. "Did you see the Valkyrian fleet movements? They've been repositioning ships near the outer rim for 3 weeks. "I saw," Jake said. "So did they." Ben glanced at him. "They?" Jake did not answer. He did not need to. They all knew who he meant. Behind them, back in the Grand Council chamber, the lights flickered for just a moment. In the shadows along the walls, something moved, not much. Just a ripple in the darkness like heat waves on a summer road. None of the aliens noticed. They were too busy congratulating themselves on another successful session. Another day of maintaining the order they had built over thousands of years. They did not see the shapes in the shadows. They did not feel the eyes watching them from places that existed between normal space. They had no idea that every word they spoke, every insult they delivered, every dismissive gesture they made toward the quiet humans in the back, was being observed by something that did not play by the rules of normal physics. Jake walked through the corridors with Lisa and Ben, his face showing nothing. But deep in his jacket pocket, his communication device vibrated once. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. The message was short, written in a code that only a handful of humans could read. "We are here. We are watching. Say the word." Jake deleted the message and put the device away. He looked at Lisa and Ben. "Tomorrow's session starts at dawn. Get some rest. What about you?" Lisa asked. "I have a call to make," Jake said. He split off from the others and headed down a different corridor, one that led to the human quarters. The hallways here were empty and quiet. When he was sure he was alone, he pulled out the communicator again and typed a single word. "Wait." The reply came instantly. "Understood." In the space outside the station, in the vast emptiness between stars, something waited. things that existed in dimensions humans barely understood, things that had been humanity's secret allies for decades, things that could tear apart the most powerful warships in the galaxy without breaking the laws of physics, simply by using different laws entirely. The Galactic Council thought humans were weak. They thought humanity had nothing but outdated ships and stubborn pride. They had no idea what waited in the shadows, patient and silent, ready to move the moment their human allies gave the signal. Jake Morrison walked to his quarters and sealed the door behind him. He sat on his bed and allowed himself one small smile. The Council had made their choice. They had pushed and insulted and dismissed humanity one time too many. Soon, very soon, they would learn what a mistake that was. But not yet. Not quite yet. First, he would let them push a little further. Let them think they had won. Let them get comfortable in their arrogance, and then the shadows would move. 3 days passed before the Valkyrians made their move. Jake had expected it would be soon, but even he felt surprised at how bold they were. The announcement came through official channels at midnight station time, designed to catch everyone off guard. 12 colony worlds received the same message simultaneously. The words were polite, but the meaning was clear as glass. Evacuate within 48 hours or be considered hostile forces subject to military action. 5 of those worlds had human populations in the millions. 3 more had significant human presence alongside other species. The emergency council session convened 6 hours later. The chamber filled quickly, with delegates rushing in from all corners of the station. Some had clearly been sleeping. Others looked like they had been expecting this. The Threxians arrived early and took their seats with knowing looks on their faces. They had been in on this from the start. Jake, Lisa, and Ben walked into the chamber and headed straight for their usual seats in the back. Several delegates watched them pass. Some looked sympathetic. Most looked away. Nobody wanted to get involved in a fight between the Valkyrians and the humans. That was a good way to make powerful enemies. Zixthor stood at the central podium, his crystal shell gleaming under the lights. He carried himself with complete confidence. The Valkyrian Empire has reviewed historical territorial claims in the disputed sectors, he announced. We have determined that 12 worlds currently occupied by various species fall within our legitimate boundaries. These boundaries were established 4,000 years ago, long before current occupants arrived. Jake watched him speak. The Valkyrians' mandibles moved with satisfaction. This had been planned for months, maybe years. They had just been waiting for the right moment. The humans colonized 5 of these worlds in direct violation of established protocols. Zixthor continued. They arrived without proper authorization from this council. They built settlements without permission. They ignored our warnings. Jake stood up slowly. Every eye in the chamber turned to him. He walked down the aisle toward the center floor, moving past rows of seats filled with aliens who had ruled the galaxy for millennia. When he reached the speaking floor, he turned to face Zixthor directly. Those protocols were made before humanity joined the galactic community, Jake said clearly. We were not at the table when you drew those lines. We had no voice in those decisions. Krelnax rose from his seat, all 4 arms gesturing dramatically. And that is precisely why your opinion holds no weight here. This is a matter for established powers to resolve. The Valkyrian Empire has legitimate claims. The Threxian Empire supports those claims. The matter is settled. Settled without even hearing our side? Lisa called from the back. Her voice was calm, but it carried through the chamber. A Zephlon sphere pulsed with orange light, indicating mild interest but no real concern. The telepathic beings remained neutral, their thoughts carefully shielded from everyone. The dozen other major species on the council avoided looking at the humans. Nobody wanted to challenge the Valkyrians over newcomers who had only been in space for 30 years. The vote came quickly. The Valkyrian territorial claims were recognized. Humanity had 24 hours to begin evacuation. Not 48 anymore. The deadline had been cut in half as punishment for speaking up. This will teach them their proper place, one delegate muttered to another. They were not as quiet as they thought. Jake heard every word. As delegates began filing out of the chamber, Jake walked directly up to Zixthor. The Valkyrian High Chancellor looked down at him from his considerable height. Up close, Jake could see his reflection in the crystal shell, distorted and small. You're making a mistake, Jake said quietly. Zixthor's mandibles clicked in amusement. Is that meant to be a threat, human? What will you do? Your fleet consists of aging frigates and converted mining ships. We have conquered species far more advanced than yours. We have fought wars that lasted centuries. You are children playing in a universe you do not understand. We understand more than you think, Jake replied. Then prove it. Zixthor turned away, dismissing Jake like he was nothing, like humanity was nothing. Outside the chamber, Ben could not contain himself anymore. So we're just going to roll over? Let them push us around like we're nobody? We're going to let them think they're pushing us around, Jake corrected him. There's a difference. And what difference? Ben demanded. People are going to die if we don't evacuate in time, families, children, and for what? To prove a point? Nobody's going to die, Jake said firmly. He pulled out his communicator and typed a quick message. Trust me. Lisa read the message over his shoulder. Her eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. How long until they're in position? They already are, Jake said. They've been ready for weeks. On the 5 contested human colony worlds, the evacuation began. Civilians loaded onto transport ships with whatever they could carry. Children cried. Parents tried to stay calm and failed. The local defense forces prepared their weapons, knowing full well they could not win against a Valkyrian war fleet, but determined to fight anyway. The galactic news networks covered everything. Cameras showed human families boarding ships. Reporters interviewed military experts who explained in detail how quickly the human defenses would fall. Some gave humanity 6 hours. The optimistic ones predicted 12. Nobody thought the colonies could hold for more than a day. Captain Amy Rodriguez stood on the bridge of her patrol ship orbiting the largest human colony in the sector. She was 29 years old, and she had never commanded anything bigger than a mining escort before this week. Now she was in charge of defending 3 million people against an empire that had been conquering worlds since before Earth had written language. Her sensor officer looked nervous. Captain, we're reading massive energy signatures at the edge of the system. Multiple hyperspace exits. It's the Valkyrian fleet. Amy took a deep breath. She had received her orders directly from Commander Morrison himself. They had been strange orders, confusing orders, but they had been very, very specific. All ships maintain defensive positions, she commanded. Do not fire unless I give the order, no matter what happens. Captain, the sensor officer looked confused. You heard me. Hold position. Trust the plan. Deep in space, far from any world or station, something waited. Ships that did not appear on any scanner. Vessels that existed in the spaces between dimensions where normal physics did not apply. They had been there for weeks, watching and waiting. Patient beyond human understanding. Inside one of these ships, if they could be called ships, beings of living shadow observed the approaching Valkyrian fleet through senses that human science could not explain. They communicated without words, sharing thoughts and feelings and calculations across dimensions. The Valkyrians were coming. The time was near. Their human allies had not given the final signal yet, but it would come soon. And when it did, the galaxy would learn a lesson it should have learned long ago. Never dismiss those who sit quietly in the back. Never assume that silence means weakness, and never ever push someone until you know what stands behind them in the shadows. Jake Morrison sat in his quarters on the council station, watching the news feeds from the colony worlds. He saw the fear on people's faces. He saw children being carried onto ships. He saw Defense Force volunteers who knew they were probably going to die but stood their ground anyway because that is what humans did. His communicator buzzed. A message from Amy Rodriguez. Valkyrian fleet entering weapon range in 30 minutes. Requesting permission to engage, Jake typed his response. Hold position. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage under any circumstances. The reply came back immediately. Understood. We trust you, sir. Jake closed his eyes for a moment. The weight of 3 million lives pressed down on him. If he was wrong about this, if he had miscalculated, those people would pay the price. But he was not wrong. He could not be wrong. Too much depended on this moment. He opened his communicator and pulled up a special frequency, one that normal human technology should not have been able to access. A frequency that existed between dimensions, touching realities that overlapped with his own but remained separate. He typed a single message. They've gone too far. Show them what they're dealing with. But do not destroy them, not yet. Just make them understand. The response came back in text that seemed to shift and change as he read it. Letters made of shadow that hurt to look at directly. We have waited for this moment. We will show them. We will make them see. Jake put the communicator down and stood up. He walked to the window of his quarters and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, a Velcarian fleet was about to learn that the universe was much stranger and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And they were about to learn it from the shadows that humanity called friends.